Welcome to Serrated Pages, horror, crime and genre fiction with an edge. I'm Ben, and on my weekly update this week, Stephen King's greatest love story, a paperback from hell, and a splatterpunk classic. Okay, before I dive into everything that I've been reading over the last week, and it'll be a quicker update than last week's, I think, just simply because one of the books I'm reading is a bit of a mammoth beast, and so that's taken up a lot of my reading time this week. A thanks to everyone who has been contributing to the channel over the last couple of weeks especially. I know that I've had a lot of new viewers come in through the Between Two Fires review especially, and I just really appreciate everyone who's written to me, commented on videos, emailed me. It's fantastic. I posted my YouTube newbie video on Saturday, and on that video one of the things I talked about was one of the main reasons for doing this was feeling like being part of and contributing and growing a community of like-minded genre fiction fans. So I feel like we're already on the path to doing that, and thank you so very much. First, my in-progress reads, and I posted a video a few weeks ago talking about how I'd started my first read-through of the Dark Tower series. Well, I started volume 4 in the last week, Wizard and Glass, and I'm loving it so far. It's really interesting. It's a huge read, right? It's 900 pages. It's nearly as long as the first 3 books in the series combined. And while it starts with a continuation of the story right after the sort of cliffhanger at the end of The Wastelands, it very quickly goes into a flashback telling the early life of Roland, and particularly his encounter, his first love, essentially, falling in love with this young woman, Susan, who has been promised to bear the child of a mayor in a local town far away from Gilead, where Roland and his friends have been exiled. That story is proving to be amazing so far. Before we got to that, there's also the first major detour into another one of Stephen King's universes, which I loved, where the characters from the Dark Tower find themselves in 1986 Kansas in the wake of the superflu from The Stand, with dead bodies everywhere. And so that's interesting. It's the first real major connection with other Stephen King universes. Obviously, I know there's more to come in terms of that stuff. The flashback stuff and Roland's story, which I guess is probably the divisive part of the book, because some people don't, I think, jibe with the fact that it goes into this kind of fairy tale Western thing. And it feels like a combination of a bunch of different things. It feels like it's firstly the first out-and-out way that Stephen King has played in the Western genre since some of the Gunslinger has some of that Western feel, particularly early in the Gunslinger when Roland finds himself in a small town, you know, staying in the tavern in the small town. This feels like Good, the Bad and the Ugly, with Romeo and Juliet's romance kind of layered on top, and then elements of like Grimm's fairy tales as well. You know, there's an evil witch, there's a curse, there's all this kind of stuff going on. So yeah, I'm loving it so far. Halfway through, I'm interested to see how much the flashback takes up of the rest of the book. I'm going to assume it's nearly all of it, so we'll see. But I'm loving it. I love just how this series gives Stephen King an opportunity to play in all of these genres and throw so many ideas that he seems to have been cooking up in his mind but hasn't been able to find other avenues to explore them. So, as I said, he explores fairy tales, westerns, tragic romance, and this definitely feels like the best love story he's ever written, right? I mean, I think the romance between Roland and Susan is really sweet. It's beautifully written, and I can't think of another Stephen King book that's doing romance as well as this. So yeah, loving it so far. More to come on that. On top of Wizard and Glass, I finished 2 books this week, and the first, which I've already posted a review of, so I'll keep my thoughts fairly brief on this, is Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door from 1989, a fairly notorious horror classic from one of the leading voices in the splatterpunk movement from the 80s, although I should point out that The Girl Next Door doesn't really feel like a splatterpunk book. It's not a super gory, extreme horror type thing. It's more feels like a very grimy true crime story, as it is based on a real story that happened in the mid-60s. I will say that the book, I think, deserves its reputation, and you can see my extended thoughts in my review, but it's not just really hard to take at times, and certainly it gets to some really unpleasant extreme places. It is deeply sad, and that's probably the thing that a lot of extreme horror fiction doesn't get, right? Quite often it's just about grossing you out and showing you extreme, or describing extreme stuff. This definitely has the extreme stuff, but it really does hit with an emotional punch that really left me bummed out and pretty sad and almost tearful at the end. It's a really, really sad, tragic story. And then it's all wrapped up in this really interesting piece of writing where the narrator is not really an unreliable narrator, but he is a narrator who is both an observer and a participant in the abuse which is happening in the book to the titular girl next door. So highly recommend it. Definitely a warning if you've got kids. It's a particularly hard book to read because it does involve very dark, unpleasant things being committed by children, but I think it deserves its reputation. It's a classic for a good reason, and definitely a different flavor of extreme horror, because it's extreme horror but it's also extreme emotion, which doesn't always come through in this kind of like splattery type fiction. Finally, the other book which I read this week is a collection of 2 short novellas, and that's When Darkness Loves Us by Elizabeth Engstrom, republished fairly recently by Valancourt Books as part of their Paperbacks from Hell series. It's a really interesting read, and I did The Nest, the first book in that Paperbacks from Hell series, a couple of weeks back. This is very different. This is female-written psychological horror, and with kind of a gothic flavor. Definitely touches on themes of motherhood, marriage, and yeah, it's really interesting. The first story especially, which is When Darkness Loves Us, involves, and I'll just do the setup, it's a woman who lives a beautiful rural existence on a farm. One day she finds a tunnel which she wanders into. The entrance to the tunnel closes behind her, and she finds herself having to live underground for days, weeks, months, years. And the story follows the horror of what happens to her underground, and also what happens to her when she finally gets out. And it's really unnerving, really, really dark and strange. And yeah, definitely it's worth picking this up just for that story. The second story, Beauty is which is a story of a disabled, deformed girl, and it flashes back between her current life and her troubled childhood growing up under an abusive father, and a mother who figures herself to be some kind of healer, some kind of medical, sort of spiritual healer. And this is a bit more of a slow burn. It touches on some of the similar themes as the first story, in the sense of motherhood and the sort of abuse of parents, psychological abuse more than anything. And it's a bit more of a slow burn. It doesn't work quite as well as the first story, which is much tighter, much shorter. But it's a completely different flavor of Paperback from Hell from The Nest, of the the splattery creature feature of The Nest. And Elizabeth Engstrom hasn't written much fiction, but it's a really interesting book, and I definitely think it's worth investigating, particularly only if you only pick it up to read the first story, which is a fairly short read. I mean, both these stories together I think are under 200 pages. So it's a quick read, and the first story is fantastic. Okay, I've got a few things coming up on the channel this week for you. I've got a book haul, my final book outlet book haul, which I've been waiting to post from their recent sale. And then I've got a review coming up later in the week of the first 3 John Connolly, Charlie Parker books, which is my current favorite crime series, one that I'm absolutely loving, introduced to me by my good friend Stuart Barr, who you probably see down in the comments at some point. And it is, yeah, I'm loving it. It's a perfect blend of mystery, detective stuff, serial killer, dark underpinning of kind of dark secrets from the past. I love all that stuff. It definitely feels like the most horror adjacent detective series I've read recently, so I'm really enjoying it. There's over 20 books to get my teeth into here, so the first 3 I've loved so far, and more on that later in the week. Other than that, end of the month coming up, I'll be posting my TBR for April. I'd love to get some more suggestions for my TBR in April. I mean, to be honest, I've had so many recommendations from the Between Two Fires review of other fantasy stuff. I think I may well do a fantasy read of some sort, probably Christopher Buehlman's The Black Tongue Thief. So we'll see what happens there. I'm probably going to do some Japanese translated horror. Would love some more recommendations for translated Japanese horror to put on the TBR, and probably some surprises along the way as well. But yeah, more on that probably after next weekend. But hope you're well. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate everyone's comments, everyone's kind words from getting this channel up and running. So I'll see you in a few days' time. Thanks very much.